Hi, Fred. Wow, that was a really eloquent and elegant defence of the humanities. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I've watched it 3 times in a row now, your closing statement, and just been blown away. Made me rethink my positions, reconsider my positions, think about just the source and the underpinnings of where our different worldviews and different mindsets come from. It was great. What a great 12 minutes, something like that. I'm not going to get anywhere near that level of eloquence, but I think it boils down to one word really, and it's the idea of universality. I think the root cause is this. The root issue is, for me, the more truthful something is, the more universal it is. And so when I talked about the cosmic microwave background, it wasn't the aesthetics, which you referred to in one of your other statements. It's nothing to do with the aesthetics. It doesn't matter how we represent that or how pretty it might be. It's the fact that it's there. And it's the fact that a civilization here or another civilization in a galaxy far, far away and a time far, far away, long ago, would that microwave background is there for them. We are trivial. And this is the issue, I think. For me, yes, in terms of the scientific realism you talked about, if that's a myth, then fine. The issue, however, is, as has always been, it's a justification of our beliefs. For me, that empiricism, that empirical grounding, gives me a justification for those beliefs. Gives me a justification for those, if you will, myths. Without that empiricism, what do you have? You said yourself you have subjective truths. What is the truth of the Mandelbrot said? Well, it's there. It's waiting to be discovered. In some important sense, it's waiting to be discovered. Once a civilization gets to the point where the mathematics and the computational skills are sufficiently well developed, it's there. They can find it. It's indeed a question of transcendence, but for me it's a question of transcending our trivial civilization. Something that transcends all of what we have, something that transcends Google, something that transcends YouTube. Something that's out there waiting to be discovered. Now you can call that a myth if you want, that's fine. But I would argue that the truth value of that particular myth, if we're going to call it that, is justified due to the empiricism that supports it. And this is what I mean by triviality. For you, that wider truth, that universality that I hold to be above the personal truths, for you, that universal truth is trivial. And for Peterson, it's clearly trivial. And it's the personal truths that have a more universal footing. I can't get that. I can't understand that. That to me makes no sense, because then it's entirely subjective. And again, if we go all the way back right to the start in terms of epistemology, which is about justified belief, how do you justify that belief? What is the framework on which you do that? How do you justify your truth above my truth? Absolutely, Living Colour, to me, that gig, my particular truth was that was a wonderful gig. Somebody else's particular truth was that was not a great gig. And you said this, those are trivial. But then you can extend that to every personal truth. In terms of philosophy and in terms of the arts and humanities, it's those deeper truths that span more than the individual, that span culture, that span society. It's those deeper truths. So it's again about the universality of those particular truths, that the truth value relates to the universality. Mythology, you drew a distinction between mythology and superstition. For me, that's a blurred boundary, I'm afraid. That's a very grey area. Mythology, to me, I'm afraid, religion, superstition, mythology, they're 3 sides of the same coin. They're, they're meshed together, distinguishing and deconvolving, to use a mathematical term, those particular aspects of storytelling and fables. I don't see a difference. It's why I brought up Leviticus, because Leviticus is it's not so much a question of those individual sub-myths or superstitions, if you want to call them that. Maybe sub-myths is better. It's the fact that they are embedded in an overarching mythological framework. When Jesus came along, he did not, if we're going to take Christ as the mythical figure, and I think even Peterson would do this, Christ did not reject the Old Testament. He did not reject Leviticus. It's part of the grand story, the grand fable, the grand myth. Now, Peterson would dismiss that as pure nihilism, whichever way you want to pronounce it. But to use the language that many of Peterson's acolytes would use, fuck your feelings, not your feelings, Fred, Peterson's feelings. This is it. And if we want a truth, if we want a universal truth, if we want a truth that isn't trivial, it's beyond us. It's beyond us. And if that's a scientific, realistic point of view, then yes, I'll hold my hands up. And I'm very happy, like Sakal, to say that I'm a stuffy old scientist and I'll go with the empirical basis, because no one has yet shown me that there's a better way to do it. Because we can, if we don't embrace that, then we can have whatever myths we like. And they're all just as good as one another. And again, that's postmodernist to its core. The thing that Peterson rails against time and time again is exactly the thing he espouses, whereby empirical truths are nested within religious, he calls them Darwinian, but he really means religious, mythical truths. You mentioned moral facts. How do we define a fact? How do we define a moral fact? I know Harris, for example, certainly has ideas, and we could spend a great deal of time, maybe we'll revisit sometime down the line, just in terms of universal moral frameworks, etc. But that's a massive can of worms in terms of defining just what we mean by a moral fact, and how would we weigh up, those moral values. We can have certain principles put in place, but then we weigh up the effects of our choices against those principles. So we're getting, again, very, very close to an empirical framework. We're doing the measurements. You mentioned that in our everyday lives we don't rely on empiricism. Well, we sort of do. We don't put our hand on a very hot, stove regularly. We don't deliberately run into a wall at full speed. And an example again that Harris used, you've got a cheating spouse or whatever. You look for evidence and you try and weigh up. It might torment you, etc. But what you look for is evidence. And courts of law, evidence. We're empirically driven. We're empirically driven. Faith, hope, clarity. So you made a fantastic point here, amongst many fantastic points, Fred, which is, does clarity deceive, or can clarity deceive? Yes. Apparently clear language can certainly deceive, and it's something we guard against in science and pop science. So most of us at least try to guard against it in pop science a lot of the time. I'm involved in this 60 Symbols channel, so I'm very used to trying to compress material down into 5 minutes. I beat myself up, and Brady Harron, the video maker, the brainchild behind the 60 Symbols channel and many other channels, he and I debate this and argue this an awful lot, because I worry about the extent to which I'm misrepresenting the science and misleading people. Good example is we did a video on a number of years back on why is glass transparent. Now that's a massive topic, a really massive topic. We compressed it down to a little over 5 minutes, and then you get comments underneath, and I know you should never read the comments, certainly doing much less of that, but you get comments underneath, well, surely that can't be all there is to it. Of course that's not all there is to it. 5 minutes when you can have 30-hour lecture modules on matter-light interactions, and that only begins to scratch the surface. So of course, in that sense, do we put across the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? No, absolutely not. We compress it down. And by making it clear, you're absolutely right, we actually muddy the waters, or can very easily muddy the waters. But there's a difference between that and what Barrett does. What really resonated and rang through to me struck a massive chord was when you said, well, actually what you're doing is you're dividing sociology up, the good sociology and the bad sociology, on the basis of your empirical scientific standards. You're absolutely right. When you said that, I was going, oh, wow. Yeah, he's right. That's exactly what I'm doing. But until it's said to you, like you did, I didn't recognize it. But you're right. That's what I'm doing. Is that something I should be guilty about? I don't think so. Because again, it comes back to the point. How else do I decide? And Barrett's a really interesting case because she makes the point that her sociology does feed in and can help inform, that's what she says, quantum physics. There is, very difficult to say, I'm choosing my words with great care, very difficult to understand how that type of impenetrable right, and quantum mechanics is already quite tricky and impenetrable enough as it is in many ways. I don't quite see how if Barrett's searching for truth in an unempirical way, how does that feed into science which is driven by empiricism? Seems strange to me. Finally, does Peterson tell the truth? Peterson tells his own truth. Peterson tells his own subjective truth, and he places those subjective truths above universal, empirical truths. Does he tell the truth? Yes. He tells very trivial, subjective truths. I look forward to our hangout tomorrow evening, Fred. It'll be fun going through some of the comments and illuminating, going through some of the comments. Hugely enjoyed this, and I will see you tomorrow evening. Bye.